You remember the handshake. That's always the first thing you remember. Firm, warm. The kind of handshake your father spent years trying to teach you, the kind that says, "Times I'm someone you can trust, times before a single word leaves your mouth." His name was John Wayne Gacy. You met him at a neighborhood cookout on a Saturday afternoon in late summer, and he was the kind of man who fills a space without trying. Loud laugh, easy smile. He'd brought ribs enough for 30 people, and he moved through the crowd like he'd known everyone there his whole life, refilling drinks, remembering names, making each person feel like the most important one in the yard. You were 21 years old, you thought you were pretty good at reading people. You were wrong about that. 6 weeks out of work will change the way you process information. It narrows things. It makes you focus on what's in front of you and stop asking questions about what's underneath. You weren't desperate, not yet, but you could feel desperate coming. The way you can feel weather before it arrives, a pressure in the air, a shift in the light. So when John mentioned, casually between bites of food and sips of beer, that he was always looking for young guys willing to show up and work hard, willing to actually work times, you said yes before he finished the sentence. He gave you his card. PDM Contractors, John W. Gacy, President. You kept it in your jacket pocket for 2 days before you called. You almost didn't call. You told yourself you were waiting to see if something better came through. But nothing came through. Nothing was coming through. So you called. And he answered on the second ring like he'd been expecting you. The first day on the job was normal in every way that mattered. You hauled materials. You followed instructions. You ate lunch with the other guys on the tailgate of a truck and nobody said much, and that was fine. John wasn't there most of the morning. When he showed up around noon, he came straight to you, not to check your work, just to check on times, and he slapped you on the back and said you were doing great. Said he had an eye for good workers. Said you reminded him of himself at your age. You felt good about that. You remember that specifically. The feeling of being seen by someone who seemed to matter. That's the part that took you the longest to forgive yourself for. Not the mistakes you made later, that part. That first feeling of being chosen by a man you didn't know yet. Because that feeling was real, and it was the thing he used, and it worked perfectly. The first wrong detail came on day 3. You were working late, just you and John, finishing a floor installation in one of the rooms on the north side of the house. The other guys had gone home. The radio was on low, some AM station playing oldies, and John was telling a story about a job in Northbrook, laughing, gesturing with his hands while he talked the way he always did. Then he stopped, mid-sentence, mid-word, almost. You were on your knees working the flooring and you looked up because the silence was sudden enough to notice. He was watching you, not your work, you. The expression on his face wasn't anything you could name. It wasn't anger. It wasn't friendliness either. It was something neutral in a way that felt like the absence of something like a face someone puts on when they've stopped performing and haven't decided what comes next. It lasted 2 seconds. Maybe 3. Then the laugh came back. The story came back. He picked up the sentence exactly where he'd dropped it. You went back to the floor. You told yourself it was nothing. You were right that it was something. You just didn't know yet what kind of something it was. John was the kind of man who expressed trust through generosity. He'd invite workers to dinner. He'd produce tickets to things, Cubs games, charity events, neighborhood association, fundraisers he'd helped organize. He knew everyone, the people on the block, the people at the Democratic Party office, the local politicians who came to him when they needed help with something and who he went to when he needed the same. There were photos on the wall of his house, framed. Him shaking hands with men in suits, plaques, certificates, and in the hallway, almost casual in its placement, a photograph of him standing next to Rosalind Carter, the First Lady of the United States. Smiling. Both of them smiling. You stood in front of that photo the first time you came to the house and you thought, this is not a man I need to be afraid of. That thought was the most dangerous one you ever had. He'd invited a few of the guys over on a Thursday evening. Wife was visiting family. Just dinner, drinks, nothing formal. The least he could do, he said, for people working as hard as his crew had been. You almost didn't go, you went. The house on Summerdale was bigger inside than it looked from the street. The living room was warm and well lit, good furniture, a bar cart with better whiskey than you were used to. He poured without asking, already knew what you'd want, and handed you the glass like the decision had already been made. 2 other guys were there when you arrived. You'd seen them on the job but didn't know them well. They were easy company. Dinner was good. John was in full performance. The stories, the energy, the laugh that arrived right on cue every time, and for most of the night it felt like exactly what he said it was. Just dinner. Just people unwinding at the end of a long week. Around 9, the other guys left. You don't remember them saying goodbye. You don't remember the moment they stood up, put on their coats, walked out. One moment they were there, and then the house was quiet, and it was just you and John, and the space between the 2 of you felt slightly different than it had before. Slightly smaller. You noticed the smell then. It had probably been there the whole time. You just hadn't been paying the right kind of attention. It wasn't strong. It wasn't something you could point to and name. It lived underneath everything else. Underneath the food, underneath the whiskey, underneath the faint sawdust and paint smell that clung to John's clothes, even when he dressed up. Something older than all of that. Something low and damp and wrong in a way that didn't match the warmth of the room, the photos on the wall, the glass of good whiskey in your hand. You told yourself it was the crawl space. Old houses smell like that. Moisture gets in. You kept drinking. John refilled your glass and leaned back in his chair and asked where you saw yourself in 5 years. He listened to your answer with the kind of attention that makes you feel like what you're saying is genuinely interesting, genuinely important tea, and you kept talking longer than you normally would have because the attention felt good and the whiskey was warm and the room was bright and the smell was just a smell. You felt chosen again. Later you would understand that this was not an accident. That the attention and the warmth and the generosity were all load-bearing walls and something he'd been building for years. That you were not the first person to sit in that chair and feel chosen. That most of the others who'd sat there had not gone home afterward. You didn't know that yet. Around 10 o'clock he suggested a game. A trick, he called it. Something he'd learned from a guy he knew. A party trick. He was smiling the whole time he explained it. Easy and loose, the way you are when something is genuinely harmless. He produced a pair of handcuffs from somewhere real ones, not a novelty. The metal heavy and cold in a way that didn't match the warmth of everything else in the room, and he said the trick was in figuring out how to get out of them. You hesitated. He laughed. Come on! It's nothing. You put your hands behind your back. The cuffs clicked shut. He stood in front of you. He wasn't smiling anymore. He let the silence sit for just a moment, just long enough, and then he said, quietly, almost gently, the trick is that there is no trick. The room didn't change. The light was the same, the whiskey in your glass was the same, but something shifted in the air between you, something you felt in your chest before you understood it in your head, and the hair on your forearms was standing up and your mouth was dry in a way that had nothing to do with alcohol, and you could hear your own heartbeat. You laughed, the nervous kind, the kind your body produces when it doesn't know what else to do. He watched you laugh. He didn't join in. You asked him to take the cuffs off. He looked at you. That look again, the one from day 3. In the room with the radio on, 2 seconds too long. And then something moved across his face, something that looked almost like a decision being made and then unmade, and he reached into his pocket. He produced the key. He was smiling again, the cookout smile. The photograph with the First Lady smile. Got you, he said. He unlocked the cuffs and handed you another drink and laughed about what a good trick it was. And the room felt warm again, and you laughed with actual relief this time, real relief. The kind that makes your whole body exhale at once. You told yourself you'd overreacted. You told yourself this man was just strange, just an odd guy with an odd sense of humor, and that was fine, that was allowed. Strange was not the same as dangerous. You stayed another hour. You don't know why you stayed another hour. He walked you to the door when you left, shook your hand, firm, warm, confident, exactly like the first time. Said he'd see you Monday. You walked to your car and you drove home and you told yourself the whole drive that everything was fine, that you'd had a weird evening with a weird guy and tomorrow it would just be a story. You didn't sleep that night. You lay in the dark and stared at the ceiling and told yourself you were being dramatic. Told yourself a man with Rosalind Carter on his wall was not someone to be afraid of. Told yourself the smell was just the crawl space, the look was just a tick, the handcuffs were just a bad joke. By morning you had almost convinced yourself. Monday you went back. It was a Tuesday. 3 weeks later, when it stopped being something you could explain away, late afternoon, already dark. You were the last one on the site. John came out of the house and asked if you could help him with something inside, not the job site, the Times house. His voice was the same as always, easy, matter of fact, and you followed him, because you'd spent 3 weeks telling yourself everything was fine and you'd almost started to believe it. You stepped inside, the smell hit you like a wall, you stopped walking. Your body stopped before your mind did, your feet just stopped. John kept walking. "Come on," he said. He didn't turn around. Your legs didn't move. He turned around. His face was different, completely different. The performance was gone, the warmth, the laugh, the easy confidence, and what was underneath it was something you'd never seen on a human face before, something that had no name in any category of expression you'd ever learned, and your body understood what it was looking at before your brain could form the words. You ran, you made it to the kitchen, he grabbed your arm, you pulled, he didn't let go, you pulled harder, he still didn't let go. Your shoulder hit the door frame, you screamed, his hand covered your mouth, you bit down as hard as you could, he didn't react, not even a flinch. You got your hand on the door, you got it open, cold air hit your face, you ran into the street and you didn't look back and you didn't stop running until you were 3 houses down and your legs gave out and you fell onto someone's front lawn and pressed your face into the cold, wet grass and breathed and breathed and breathed until the breathing stopped shaking. You never went back to the house. You never called the police. You've thought about that choice every single day of your life since December 22nd, 1978. That was the day they arrested him. The day the construction workers found something wrong under the house, the day someone finally went in and looked at what was underneath the floors, underneath the rooms, underneath the smell that you had told yourself on a Thursday night with a glass of good whiskey in your hand was just an old house being an old house. They found 26 bodies in the crawl space, 26, 7 more in the river, 33 total, 33 young men and boys who had sat where you sat, felt what you felt, gone through the same door you went through and hadn't made it back out to the lawn. You read the names when they published them. You recognized 2 of them from the job site. Guys who'd shown up for a few weeks and then stopped showing up, and John had mentioned them once, time so-and-so moved on, found something else times, and you had nodded and gone back to work. You didn't let yourself think about what that means, what the timeline means, what the dates mean. You've never let yourself think about that all the way to the end. People want to know how you missed it, and you understand the question. You've asked it yourself 10,000 times, lying in the dark in the years since. How do you sit in that house? How do you feel the handcuffs click? How do you smell what you smelled and see what you saw and file it away under time's strange guy? Probably nothing. The honest answer is that he was very, very good at being exactly what you needed him to be. And you were 21 years old and out of work and hungry for someone to look at you and say, Times, you're exactly the kind of person I was looking for. And those 2 things together were enough. That's all it took. That's all it ever takes. There's a version of October that you've run in your head so many times, the details have worn smooth from use. In that version, you go to the police after the handcuffs. You sit across from someone in a beige room and you describe the look on his face and the smell in the house and the way he grabbed your arm on that Tuesday in the dark, and someone listens, and someone goes to check, and they find what was under the floor before there was as much of it to find. You know how many people are different in that version. You know the number exactly. You don't say it out loud. You've never said it out loud. There are things that live in your chest that you've decided will die there. Not because you're protecting yourself, you gave up on that a long time ago, but because saying them out loud would make them take up more space than they already do, and you're not sure you have the room. John Wayne Gacy was executed on May 10th, 1994. You didn't watch the news that night. You drove. Just drove. Nowhere specific. Down streets you knew and streets you didn't. Through the part of the city where Summerdale Avenue still existed, even though the house was gone, torn down. Something new built on top of it. Something that had no memory of what it used to hold. You didn't stop. You just drove past it. It looked like nothing. You drove home and you sat in your car in the driveway for a long time. You survived John Wayne Gacy. You know that. You got out. You went home that Tuesday night and you woke up the next morning and the morning after that and every morning since, which is more than 33 people can say. You survived. You've just spent 30 years trying to work out whether surviving and being okay are actually the same thing. They're not. You know that now. But you get up anyway. Every morning you get up anyway.